Commander Susan Miller stood at the viewport of the Earth Alliance vessel Trailblazer, watching the massive Xeraxian mothership grow larger as they approached. After decades of searching the stars for intelligent life, humans had finally made contact with an advanced alien civilization. The Xeraxians had technology that seemed like magic to humans. They had evolved beyond physical tools, using neural implants that connected directly to their technology. "Are you nervous?" asked Lieutenant Jack Peterson, coming to stand beside her. Jack was her most trusted officer, a man who had risen through the ranks because of his practical thinking and reliable nature. "A little," Susan admitted. "First contact is a big responsibility," Jack nodded and patted the pocket of his uniform. Susan smiled, knowing what was inside. Jack never went anywhere without his emergency kit, a habit from his days as a wilderness survival instructor. The small package contained basic items, a multi-tool, water purification tablets, fire starters, a compass, and a simple first aid pack. "Still carrying that old thing?" Susan asked. "Better to have it and not need it then." "Need it and not have it," Jack replied with a shrug. The communications officer, Olivia Wright, turned from her station. "Commander, the Xeraxians have sent docking instructions. They're ready to receive our delegation." Susan took a deep breath. "All right, Jack, Nathan, Olivia, you're with me. Let's make a good impression." Chief Engineer Nathan Howard joined them at the shuttle bay. He was fascinated by the technical specifications the Xeraxians had shared and couldn't wait to learn more about their advanced systems. The shuttle journey was short. As they docked with the alien vessel, Susan reviewed what they knew about Xeraxian culture. The aliens valued technology above all else and measured a species' worth by their technological achievements. This meeting would determine if humans were considered advanced enough to join their galactic coalition. The airlock opened to reveal three tall, slender beings with pale blue skin and large almond-shaped eyes. The tallest stepped forward. "Welcome to the Harmony of Progress. I am High Minister Kelver of the Xeraxian Council. We have been observing your species with great interest." Susan stepped forward and bowed slightly. "High Minister, I am Commander Susan Miller of Earth. We are honored by this opportunity for cultural exchange." Kelver's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. "Yes, cultural exchange. We are particularly interested in how your species has progressed despite your limitations." The humans were led through corridors that seemed to shift and change as they walked. The walls glowed with soft light, and Susan noticed there were no visible controls or interfaces anywhere. "How do you control your ship's systems?" Nathan asked, unable to contain his curiosity. A second Xeraxian, introduced as Science Director Trenler, tapped the side of her head. "Our neural implants connect directly to the ship. We simply think what we wish to happen, and it occurs." "Fascinating," Nathan said. "On our ships, we still use physical interfaces and backup systems." "How quaint," said the third Xeraxian Jr. "Diplomat Vexenor, like children playing with blocks." Susan noticed Jack stiffen beside her but gave him a warning glance. They couldn't afford to be offended by alien cultural differences. The Xeraxians led them to a large chamber where several more aliens waited. The room had no furniture, as the Xeraxians preferred to stand or float slightly above the floor using their neural technology. "Please tell us more about your species," Kelver said. "We are particularly interested in how you compensate for your biological weaknesses." For the next hour, Susan explained human history and achievements, focusing on their space exploration program and technological advances. The Xeraxians listened with expressions that shifted between interest and amusement. During a break in the conversation, Jack shifted uncomfortably and reached into his pocket to check his emergency kit, a nervous habit. The movement caught Vexenor's attention. "What is that object you keep touching?" the young diplomat asked. Jack hesitated, then pulled out the small package. "It's just my emergency kit, basic survival supplies." The Xeraxians moved closer, suddenly interested. Trenler reached out. "May I?" Jack handed over the kit, and the science director opened it carefully. The aliens examined each item with expressions of growing amusement. "What is this primitive tool?" Trendler asked, holding up the multi-tool. It's for repairs, cutting things. Basic tasks, Jack explained. And these tablets? Kelver asked. They purify water, make it safe to drink. Vexener made a sound that Susan realized was laughter. Your bodies cannot filter toxins naturally? How do you survive? The Zaraxians passed around the items, their amusement growing with each one. And this is for creating fire? Trendler asked, holding the fire starter. You still use combustion for heat? Sometimes, yes, Jack said, his face growing red. Especially in emergency situations. Kelver turned to the other Zaraxians. Our new friends still rely on physical objects to survive. Their technology is even more basic than we thought. The aliens began speaking in their own language, occasionally glancing at the humans and making what seemed to be jokes. Susan felt her heart sink. This was not going well. High Minister, she said firmly, while our technology may seem simple to you, we value preparedness and self-reliance. Lieutenant Peterson's kit represents our belief in being ready for any situation. Kelver made a dismissive gesture. Of course, Commander. It is ... charming, like watching young species take their first steps toward true civilization. Before Susan could respond, the ship suddenly lurched. The lights flickered and several Zaraxians cried out in pain, clutching their heads. What's happening? Susan asked, reaching for the wall to steady herself. Trendler's face showed fear, the first real emotion Susan had seen from the aliens. The nearby star is experiencing a massive solar flare. The electromagnetic pulse is interfering with our neural networks. Another violent shake threw them all to the floor. Emergency lights flashed on, bathing the room in red. The Zaraxians seemed disoriented, some crawling on the floor as if they'd forgotten how to stand. Our connection to the ship's systems is failing, Kelver said, his voice shaking. This has never happened before. A loud boom echoed through the ship, and part of the ceiling collapsed. Susan heard hissing, the sound of air escaping. We're losing atmosphere in this section, Nathan shouted. We need to get to safety. The Zaraxians looked at each other in panic. Without their neural connections, they seemed lost, unable to function. Jack looked at Susan, then reached for his emergency kit that had fallen to the floor. Looks like we might need this primitive technology. After all, he said. The ship shook again. Dust and small pieces of metal fell from the ceiling. Susan watched as the Zaraxians stumbled around in confusion. Without their neural connections, they seemed lost. What do we do? Asked Vexener, the young diplomat who had laughed at Jack's emergency kit just minutes ago. His voice trembled with fear. Susan took charge immediately. Nathan, check if there's another way out of this room. Olivia, try to contact our ship. Jack, what supplies do we have? Jack picked up his emergency kit from the floor. Some items had spilled out, but he quickly gathered them. Not much, Commander. Just what's in my kit and whatever we have in our uniform pockets. The air was getting thinner. Susan could feel it becoming harder to breathe. A warning light flashed near the doorway, and she could hear alarms in the distance. Nathan returned from examining the sealed main door. Bad news, Commander. The primary exit is locked down. The ship's automatic safety systems must have sealed off this section when the air started leaking. Can't you override it? Kelver asked, looking at the humans with desperate eyes. Our neural interfaces are not functioning. We cannot communicate with the ship's systems. Nathan shook his head. I don't understand your technology well enough to hack into it. Olivia lowered her communication device. I can't reach the Trailblazer. Something is blocking the signal. The temperature in the room was dropping quickly. Susan could see her, breath forming small clouds in front of her face. The Zaraxians were shivering, their blue skin turning a deeper shade. Your species appears to be cold-blooded, Jack observed. Trendler nodded weakly. We regulate our body temperature through our neural implants. Without them, we are vulnerable to temperature changes. Jack immediately opened his emergency kit and pulled out the fire starters. We need to create heat. Are there any materials in here we can safely burn? The Zaraxians looked confused by the question. Kelver spoke slowly, as if trying to remember something long forgotten. There are synthetic fabrics in the storage compartments. They are flammable, I believe. Show me, Jack said, while Jack and Kelver searched for materials. Susan gathered everyone else in the center of the room, away from the damaged area of the ceiling. We need to conserve body heat. Humans, remove your outer jackets and share them with the Zaraxians. The humans removed their uniform jackets and draped them over the shivering aliens. Susan noticed Science Director Trendler studying them carefully. You prepared for this, Trendler said. Your uniforms have multiple layers. You anticipated environmental changes. Basic preparation, Susan replied. Humans have always had to adapt to different environments, Jack returned with Kelver. They carried several containers of synthetic fabric. Using his multi-tool, Jack cut the material into smaller pieces. He arranged them in a small pile on the metal floor, away from anything important. Stand back, he warned. Jack took out his fire starter and struck it. Sparks flew, and after a few attempts, the material caught fire. A small flame grew, giving off heat and light. The Zaraxians gathered around the fire, amazement on their faces. Such a simple solution, whispered Kelver. We have not used fire for heating in thousands of years. Nathan, Susan called, any luck finding another way out? Nathan had been examining the walls carefully. I think I found something. He pointed to a small panel near the floor. This looks like a maintenance access point. On our ships, these usually connect to service tunnels that run throughout the vessel. Using Jack's multi-tool, Nathan pried open the panel. Behind it was a narrow tunnel. It's tight, but we should be able to crawl through it. Where does it lead? Asked Susan. I'm not sure, Nathan admitted. But it might take us to a section of the ship that still has power and life support. Olivia approached the tunnel entrance and sniffed. There's a strange smell coming from there. She frowned. Could be some kind of gas? Trendler moved closer. Yes, it's maintenance purge gas. Normally harmless to us because our bodies filter toxins automatically, but without our neural systems functioning ... So the tunnel is toxic? Susan asked. Not deadly, but it would make breathing difficult and could cause unconsciousness. Trendler explained. Jack looked thoughtful. He reached into his kit and pulled out the water purification tablets. These contain iodine. I wonder ... Trendler took one of the tablets and examined it closely. Interesting. With some modifications, we might be able to create simple gas filters. Like gas masks? Jack asked. Primitive versions, yes, Trendler said, but there was no mockery in her voice. This time, Susan checked her watch. The air in this room won't last more than 2 hours. Let's work on those gas masks. Jack and Trendler sat near the fire, working together. Jack showed her how to use the multi-tool while Trendler explained the chemical properties of the gas. They tore strips from their uniforms and used the water purification tablets to create makeshift filters. Meanwhile, Nathan continued to explore the tunnel entrance. It narrows after about 10 meters, but I think we can make it through. If my guess is right, it should lead to the next section of the ship. Vexenor, who had been quiet since the crisis began, suddenly spoke up. There's an auxiliary control room 2 sections over. If we can reach it, we might be able to restore some manual controls. How do you know that? Kelver asked, surprised. I studied ship architecture before joining the diplomatic corps, Vexenor said. I always found physical structures fascinating, even though most Zaraxians consider it obsolete knowledge. Susan smiled at him. That obsolete knowledge might save our lives today. Jack and Trendler finished making simple gas masks for everyone. They were crude just fabric masks treated with dissolved iodine tablets, but Trendler believed they would provide enough protection for a short journey through the maintenance tunnel. The fire won't last much longer, Jack said, looking at their dwindling supply of burnable material. And it's getting colder. Then we should move now, Susan decided. Nathan, you go first since you know the tunnel best. Then the Zaraxians, since they're most affected by the cold. Olivia next, then Jack, I'll bring up the rear. They put on their makeshift gas masks. Nathan crawled into the tunnel with a small piece of burning fabric to use as a torch dot before entering the tunnel. Kelver turned to Susan. "Commander, I owe you an apology. We were wrong to dismiss your technology as primitive. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most reliable." "Save the apologies for when we're all safe," Susan said with a smile. "Now let's move." One by one, they entered the dark tunnel, leaving the failing room behind them. Their only guide was Nathan's small torch, and their only protection against the toxic gas was Jack's primitive water purification tablets. But for now, it was enough to keep them alive. The maintenance tunnel was narrow and dark. They crawled in single file, with Nathan leading the way. His small torch cast long shadows on the metal walls. The air felt thick even through the makeshift gas masks, and everyone was breathing harder than normal. "How much farther?" Susan called from the back of the line. "Not sure," Nathan replied, his voice muffled by his mask. "But I think I see a junction ahead." After what seemed like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, they reached a place where the tunnel split in 3 directions. Nathan stopped and held up the torch to examine each path. "Which way?" he asked, looking back at Vexenor. The young Zyraxian diplomat crawled forward to join Nathan. "If my memory of the ship's layout is correct, we should take the right path. It should lead toward the auxiliary control room." They continued through the right tunnel. It sloped gently upward, which gave them hope. Maybe they were heading toward a better part of the ship. Suddenly, Nathan stopped. "There's something blocking the tunnel." Susan called from the back. "What is it?" "Looks like part of the ceiling collapsed," Nathan said. "There's a small gap, but it's tight. We'll have to squeeze through one at a time." Nathan went first, pushing himself through the narrow opening. The others followed one by one. When it was Kelver's turn, the High Minister hesitated. "I cannot fit through that space," he said, his voice showing rare vulnerability. Jack, who was behind him, spoke calmly. "Yes, you can. Turn sideways and go slowly. I'll help guide you." With Jack's guidance, Kelver managed to squeeze through the gap, though some of his clothing tore in the process. When everyone was safely on the other side, they continued their journey. After another 10 minutes of crawling, Nathan's torch began to flicker and die. "The torch is almost out," he called back. "Keep going," Susan urged. "We need to find an exit before we lose the light completely." Just as the torch gave its final flicker, Nathan's hand hit something solid. "I think I found a panel or door." In the darkness, they heard Nathan feeling around the edges of what seemed to be an exit panel. Jack crawled forward to help, bringing his multi-tool. "Let me try," Jack said. The others heard the sound of metal on metal as Jack worked on the panel. In complete darkness, with a sudden pop and hiss, the panel came loose. Light flooded into the tunnel, temporarily blinding them. Fresh air rushed in, and they quickly removed their gas masks. One by one, they climbed out of the tunnel into a corridor. This section of the ship seemed to have emergency power dim. Lights glowed along the walls, and they could hear the faint hum of some systems still working. "Where are we?" Susan asked, looking around. Vexenor examined their surroundings. "This is maintenance level 3. The auxiliary control room should be 1 level up and about 200 meters that way." He pointed down the corridor. They started walking, grateful to be out of the cramped tunnel. The Zyraxians still seemed weak and disoriented without their neural connections, but the immediate danger had passed. "Our neural implants are still offline," Trendler said, touching the side of her head. "But I sense very faint activity. Perhaps the systems are beginning to recover." "Let's hope so," Susan said, "but we can't count on it. We need to find that control room and see if we can contact other survivors." As they walked, Jack noticed that Vexenor was limping. "Are you injured?" he asked. Vexenor nodded. "I cut my leg on something in the tunnel. It's nothing serious." Jack stopped and knelt down to examine the wound. It was a long gash on Vexenor's lower leg, still bleeding. "This needs to be cleaned and bandaged," Jack said. He opened his emergency kit and took out the small first aid pack. "You know how to treat wounds?" Trendler asked, watching with interest. "Basic first aid," Jack replied as he cleaned the cut with an antiseptic wipe. All Earth Alliance personnel receive medical training. Our bodies normally heal themselves automatically, Trendler explained. The neural implants direct repair nanites to injured areas. Without them, we've lost this ability. Jack nodded as he applied a bandage to Vexenor's leg. Sometimes the old ways work best in an emergency. They continued down the corridor until they reached a ladder that led up to the next level. One by one, they climbed up. When they reached the upper level, they found more signs of damaged fallen debris, flickering lights, and in some places, exposed wiring. The control room should be just ahead, Vexenor said, as they approached a large door marked with Xeraxian symbols. They heard voices from inside. Susan held up her hand, signaling everyone to stop. Could be survivors, she whispered. Or it could be trouble, Kelver stepped forward. Allow me. He knocked on the door in a specific pattern 3 quick knocks, followed by 2 slow ones. After a moment, the door slid partly open, and a Xeraxian face peered out. Hi, Minister! The Xeraxian exclaimed in surprise. We thought you were in the diplomatic section when it was sealed off. We escaped through the maintenance tunnels, Kelver explained. These humans helped us survive. The door opened fully, revealing a room with about a dozen Xeraxians. They were working at manual control stations, physical interfaces that Susan hadn't seen anywhere else on the ship. What's the situation? Susan asked as they entered the room. A Xeraxian who appeared to be in charge stepped forward. Chief Engineer Mazrek, he introduced himself. The situation is grave, Commander. The solar flare caused a cascade failure in our main systems. Nearly 70% of the ship is without power or life support. We've lost contact with many sections. What about our ship, the Trailblazer? Olivia asked. We detected it moving away from the danger zone, Mazrek said. Your captain likely saw the solar flare coming and retreated to a safe distance. Smart move. So we're on our own, Nathan said. Mazrek nodded. For now, yes. We're trying to restore basic systems using these manual controls. They're ancient technology, rarely used. Susan looked around the room. The Xeraxians were struggling with the physical controls, their movements clumsy and uncertain. Maybe we can help, she offered. My crew is familiar with manual ship operations. Mazrek looked relieved. Any assistance would be welcome. Nathan immediately went to examine the control systems. Though the interfaces were alien, the principles were similar to human technology. He began explaining the basics to the Xeraxian engineers. Meanwhile, Jack approached Trendler. I have an idea, he said. You mentioned your neural implants are showing faint activity. Is there any way to boost that signal? Trendler considered this. Theoretically, yes. But we would need a power source and a way to amplify the neural frequencies. Jack emptied the remaining contents of his emergency kit onto a table. Among the items was a small solar-powered battery charger. Would this help? He asked. Trendler picked up the device, turning it over in her hands. A smile slowly spread across her face. Yes, she said. With some modifications, this might be exactly what we need. Jack and Trendler worked together at a small table in the corner of the control room. They had taken apart the solar battery charger from Jack's emergency kit. Its components were spread out before them. Trendler examined each piece with growing excitement. This is remarkably simple yet effective, she said, holding up a small circuit board. Your people still use physical electronics? For some things, Jack replied. Especially emergency equipment. Physical components can't be hacked or disabled by electromagnetic pulses. Well, not as easily anyway. Nathan joined them, taking a break from helping the Xeraxian engineers with the ship's manual controls. How's it going? He asked. We think we can modify this to create a neural signal booster, Trendler explained. It won't restore full functionality to our implants, but it might allow basic communication between Xeraxians. That would be a huge help, Nathan said. The ship's internal communication system is completely down. We're working blind. Across the room, Susan was talking with Kelver and Chief Engineer Mazrek. They stood around a physical map of the ship that had been printed on a large sheet of flexible material. We need to get to the main engineering section, Mazrek was saying, pointing to an area on the map. From there, we might be able to restart the primary power systems. What's the problem? Susan asked. KitHFY sighed. The quickest route is through this section here. He pointed to another area on the map. But our sensors indicate it's flooded with coolant fluid. Can we go around? Susan asked. Mazrek shook his head. It would take too long. Many sections of the ship are running out of emergency air. We don't have time. Susan studied the map. What if we went through the flooded section? Both Zeraxians looked at her in surprise. That's impossible, Mazrek said. The coolant fluid is toxic, and we have no protective gear. What about breathing equipment? Susan asked. Our breathing equipment is integrated with our neural systems, KitHFY explained. Without them, we have no way to survive in the coolant. Susan thought for a moment. Jack, she called. Do you still have that compass in your kit? Jack looked up from his work. Yes, why? Bring it here, please. Jack retrieved the compass and brought it to Susan. She took it and showed it to the Zeraxians. This is waterproof. If we could create a sealed breathing system using materials from around the ship, we might be able to make it through the flooded section. Mazrek looked skeptical. What does that small device have to do with breathing? Nothing directly, Susan admitted. But it proves that we can create waterproof seals with simple materials. If this tiny device can keep water out, we can create something similar to keep coolant fluid out of our lungs. Olivia, who had been listening nearby, joined the conversation. I've been exploring this level. There's a storage room down the hall with what looks like maintenance supplies. I saw some flexible tubing that might work for breathing hoses. Susan nodded. Good, Nathan. Could you and Olivia check out that storage room? See what materials we can use. While Nathan and Olivia went to find supplies, Jack and Trendler continued working on their neural signal booster. Vexener sat nearby, watching them with interest. I never understood how physical technology works, Vexener admitted. Our education system focuses on neural interfaces. We're taught to think commands, not to build or repair physical objects. That's a dangerous dependency, Jack said as he carefully soldered two components together. What happens when your neural systems fail like they did today? We never considered that possibility, Vexener said quietly. Our neural technology has been reliable for thousands of years. Every technology fails eventually, Jack said. That's why redundancy and backup systems are important. And why I carry this emergency kit. Trendler looked up from her work. Your species' focus on physical survival is fascinating. We've become so dependent on our advanced technology that we've forgotten basic survival skills, Jack smiled. My grandfather used to say that the more advanced the technology, the more important it is to remember the basics. An hour later, Nathan and Olivia returned with arms full of supplies. They had found flexible tubing, sealant material, and several empty containers that could be modified to create air tanks. It's not fancy, Nathan said as they laid out the materials, but I think we can make it work. Let's get started, Susan said. We don't have much time. The humans and Zeraxians worked together, creating makeshift breathing apparatus using the supplies Nathan and Olivia had found. Jack used his multi-tool to cut and shape materials, while Susan used her military training to design a system that would allow them to breathe safely while submerged in the coolant fluid. Meanwhile, Trendler announced a breakthrough with the neural signal booster. It's working, she exclaimed. She and KitHFY touched the simple device to their temples, and their eyes widened in surprise. We can communicate, KitHFY said in wonder. It's basic, but we can sense each other's thoughts again. Can you connect with other Zeraxians throughout the ship? Susan asked. Trendler shook her head. The range is limited to only a few meters. But if we could create more of these devices? First things first, Susan said. We need to reach engineering and restore power. Then we can worry about making more boosters. After 3 hours of work, they had created 6 sets of breathing equipment. Each set consisted of a face mask sealed, with the same material used to waterproof ship components, connected to a small air tank made from repurposed containers. They'll only provide about 15 minutes of air, Nathan warned. so we'll have to move quickly through the flooded section. It's about a 10-minute swim at normal speed, Mazrek said, studying the map. But none of us are trained for underwater navigation. I am, Susan said. I was a Navy diver before joining the Earth Alliance. I can lead us through. They decided that 6 people would make the journey to engineering: Susan, Jack, Nathan, Kelver, Trenler, and Mazrek. Olivia would stay behind, with Vexenor and the other Zaraxians to coordinate rescue efforts from the auxiliary control room. Before they left, Jack used his compass to help Susan determine the exact direction they would need to swim. He marked the route on the map and helped everyone understand the plan. Remember, he told the Zaraxians, stay calm and breathe normally. If you breathe too fast, you'll use up your air supply too quickly. The Zaraxians looked nervous but determined. None of them had ever experienced swimming before. Their neural technology had always moved them through liquid environments automatically. I never thought I would rely on such basic tools to survive, Kelver said, examining the breathing apparatus. But here we are, Susan agreed. Ready? Everyone nodded, though the Zaraxians still looked uncertain. Let's go save your ship, Susan said, leading the way out of the control room. As they walked toward the flooded section, Trenler fell into step beside Jack. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about remembering the basics. What about it? Jack asked. When this crisis is over, Trenler said, I want to learn more about your emergency kit and the philosophy behind it. Perhaps the Zaraxian Council has been too quick to dismiss physical technology as primitive. Jack smiled. I'd be happy to teach you. And maybe you could teach me about your neural interfaces in return. A fair exchange, Trenler agreed. If we survive this next challenge. They reached the sealed door that led to the flooded section. Beyond it lay their most dangerous test yet: swim through toxic coolant with only their makeshift breathing gear to keep them alive. Susan stood at the sealed door that led to the flooded section, checking everyone's breathing gear one last time. The makeshift equipment looked strange, a mix of Zaraxian technology and human ingenuity, but it was their only hope of reaching the engineering section. Remember, she said, stay close to me and follow my lead. If your mask starts to leak, signal immediately by tapping your chest 3 times. The group nodded, their faces tense with worry. For the Zaraxians especially, this was completely unknown territory. Their species had relied on neural technology for so long that the idea of physically swimming through liquid seemed alien and frightening. Ready? Susan asked. When everyone confirmed, she turned to Nathan. Open the door. Nathan operated the manual override that Mazrek had shown him. The door slid open with a hiss, and greenish liquid began to spill into the corridor. The coolant had a strange, sweet smell. Masks on? Susan ordered. Everyone put on their face masks and secured them tightly. Jack helped Trenler with hers, making sure the seal was perfect. Thank you, she said, her voice muffled by the mask. That's what friends do, Jack replied. They help each other. Susan went first, slipping into the coolant fluid. The liquid was thicker than water, more like oil. She waved for the others to follow. One by one, they entered the flooded section. The coolant fluid filled the corridor completely. Susan used a light stick from the emergency kit to illuminate the way. The green liquid distorted the light, creating eerie shadows. She checked her compass, confirming their direction, then began to swim forward. The humans moved with practiced strokes, but the Zaraxians struggled at first. Kelver tried to move his arms and legs like Susan did, but his movements were clumsy. Jack swam back to help him, demonstrating the proper technique. After a few attempts, Kelver began to move more smoothly. They swam through the flooded corridor, passing darkened rooms and sealed doors. The coolant fluid made everything look strange and distorted. Susan kept checking her compass, making sure they stayed on course. About halfway through, Trenler suddenly stopped swimming and began to tap her chest frantically. Susan saw bubbles escaping from one side of her mask. The seal was failing. Jack immediately swam to Trenler. He pulled a small packet from his pocket, the last of the sealant they had used to make the masks. Working quickly, he applied it to the leaking area, pressing firmly until the bubbles stopped. Trendler's eyes above the mask showed her gratitude. They continued swimming, more carefully now. Their air supplies were running low, and they still had some distance to go. Finally, they reached another sealed door, the entrance to the engineering section. Nathan and Mazrek worked together on the manual override, their movements slowed by the thick fluid. After what seemed like an eternity, the door began to open. They swam through quickly and sealed the door behind them. The engineering section was not flooded, and as the door closed, the coolant fluid drained away through floor grates. They removed their masks, gasping for air. "Everyone okay?" Susan asked, looking around at the group. They all nodded, though they were dripping wet and exhausted. The engineering section was huge, filled with complex machinery. Emergency lights provided dim illumination, revealing control panels and what looked like a central power core. Unlike the rest of the ship, this area had physical controls, buttons, levers, and switches designed for emergencies when neural interfaces failed. "The main power systems are there," Mazrek said, pointing to a large console near the center of the room. "If we can restart them, we might be able to restore basic ship functions." They approached the console. Mazrek studied it with uncertainty. "I've never used manual controls before," he admitted. "Our training covered the theory, but ... "I'll help," Nathan offered. "The principles should be similar to our systems." Together, Nathan and Mazrek began working on the power systems. Jack and Trendler set up their neural signal booster, hoping to connect with other Zeraxians in the engineering section. Susan and Kelver searched for communication equipment to contact the auxiliary control room. After nearly an hour of work, Nathan looked up from the console with a smile. "I think we've got it," he said. "Ready to try a restart sequence?" Mazrek nodded. "Ready." Nathan pressed a series of buttons and the console lit up. A low hum filled the room as machinery began to power up around them. The lights brightened, and display screens flickered to life. "It's working," Mazrek exclaimed. At the same moment, Trendler called out from across the room. "The neural network is responding. The signal booster is connecting with the ship's systems." Kelver's eyes widened as he touched his temple. "I can sense other Zeraxians again. The connection is weak, but it's there." Susan found a working communication panel and contacted the auxiliary control room. Olivia's voice came through, filled with relief. "Commander, we thought we'd lost you." "We made it," Susan replied. "Power is being restored. What's your status?" "We're okay," Olivia said. "And there's more good news. The Trailblazer has re-established contact. They're standing by to assist with rescue operations." Over the next few hours, power and life support were restored to most of the ship. The neural network began to function again, though at reduced capacity. Rescue teams found survivors in sealed sections throughout the vessel. 3 days later, Susan and her crew gathered in a meeting room aboard the Zeraxian ship. They had been invited to a special session of the Zeraxian Council. The room was filled with high-ranking Zeraxians, all watching the humans with new respect. Kelver stood before the council, his neural implants now functioning normally. "These humans saved not only my life, but the lives of countless Zeraxians," he said. "They showed us that technology alone is not enough. We must remember the value of basic skills and simple tools." The head of the council spoke. "Commander Miller, Lieutenant Peterson, we owe you a great debt. When we first saw your emergency kit, we thought it was a joke, a primitive relic from a less advanced species. We were wrong." Jack smiled. "Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most reliable." "Indeed," the council head agreed. "Which is why we have made a decision. From this day forward, all Zeraxian ships will carry emergency kits based on your design. And we will establish a training program to teach basic survival skills to our people." Trendler stepped forward, holding a small package. "We've created the first prototype," she said, handing it to Jack. "Would you examine it and tell us if we've included everything necessary?" Jack opened the package. Inside was a perfect replica of his emergency kit, with one addition: a neural signal booster like the one he and Trendler had built together. "It's perfect," Jack said. The best of both worlds, simple tools and advanced technology working together. Susan looked around at the Xeraxians and her crew, feeling a sense of pride. What had begun as a diplomatic mission had become something much more important, a lesson in humility and respect for both species. "I believe this is the beginning of a true alliance," she said. "One based on mutual respect and understanding." And, friendship, added Kelver, extending his hand in the human gesture of handshaking that Jack had taught him. Susan took his hand and smiled. "And friendship,"